Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to see you tonight after a break of a few weeks. And the topic for tonight's talk is actually a question which was sent in by one of the participants of our lectures. And it's not a simple question because it's much less straightforward than it seems to be. The question, if you have somebody who went through the process of conversion and they've converted, and at some point they have stopped being observant. And the question is such a person still considered Jewish? It affects him, affects his children, and so on and so forth. I've spoken not as a full lecture, but I've spoken a little bit about the conversion of minors, but it's more complicated with adults. The foundation of Geirus, of conversion, is something which we discussed in one of the lectures, which consists of circumcision for men, immersion in the mikveh for both men and women under the auspices of the Beis Din. But most importantly, without immersion in the mikveh and without circumcision, conversion is not a conversion. Those are necessary components in order to convert. But the foundation of conversion, what conversion is all about, is actually accepting the mitzvahs, accepting the commandments, accepting the Jewish way of life, not just a traditional way of life, but actually a halachic way of life, following halacha, following Jewish law, keeping Shabbos, keeping kosher, family purity. That is something which is not just a necessary part of conversion, it's a conversion itself. And the Chazal tell us, Chazal means the sages of the Talmud tell us, that once a person converts, it says, Ger shechozar lesurei, a ger that went back to his old way of life. In olden times, it usually meant that he went back completely to basically outside of the Jewish. He doesn't consider himself a Jew anymore. He became either a Christian like he used to be, or he dropped religion altogether. Basically, he completely, Chazal l'Sura means he completely went back to it, but it also could mean somebody that dropped the Jewish way of life. And it says, Heveki Yisrael, he is like a Jew, but Yisrael Mumer, a Jewish apostate. Apostate means either a renegade, a heretic, a betrayer. Those are the meanings of the word Mumer. And the Mumer, on one hand, is somebody that loses the respect and the status among the Jewish people, and many of his actions are considered to be actions of a non-Jew. So, for example, if a Mumer, somebody who's an apostate, he conducts a circumcision, a doctor who circumcises, in Halacha, it's considered to be as if a person was circumcised by a non-Jew. And he requires a drop of Atovas Dambris, a drop of blood to correct it, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, we are told, Kiddush of Kiddushin. He still, once he's married to somebody, he requires a get, which means that his marriage becomes valid as by a Jewish person. So on one hand, the Chazal tell us, sages tell us, that such a person doesn't lose the Jewish status once he's converted according to halacha, according to Jewish law. On the other hand, he now attains a status of a Jew that betrayed his people. That's the simple halacha, the simple law. But like many other aspects of Judaism, the nuance of halacha, when it's applied to everyday life, it's more complicated. And in order to understand exactly how this halacha applied in different situations, I want to stress something which I stress every single time when we're having the sessions. This is not to be used as a psak halacha, as halachic rulings, because rulings are required to be given in every situation according to each case. You cannot take one ruling and apply it to all different cases. So the purpose of our shiurim is to have a broader picture of what Jewish law is all about, but at the same time to understand that it cannot be used as a ruling in all cases. Every case requires its own individual attention, individual approach. So in order to understand this case, we first of all understand what exactly is a giyur on a deeper level. A giyur, a conversion, is not a ceremony, as people think, that you go through a certain ceremony and you acquire a piece of paper, like a person will go to a ceremony to receive citizenship or many, many other certificates that give him a particular access to certain areas of human life. Giyur is a completely different concept. It's like a metamorphosis. It's like a new birth. Indeed, the sages tell us that somebody who has converted according to Jewish law is like a newborn child. In many aspects, he starts his life afresh. And the reason is because if it's done halachically, if it is done according to Jewish law, the ger, the convert, actually acquires a new soul, a Jewish soul. And it's interesting that the purpose and the place of the Beis Din is very unique. The Beis Din consists of rabbis, and rabbis obviously cannot give a person this new soul. Only Hashem can. Only God himself can give a new identity, a new soul to a human being. But at the same time, we know that Hashem has made the Beis Din his facilitators. In other words, he made it conditional that only when the conversion is done through a Beis Din can that metamorphosis take place. It's a very unique concept. It's something closest to the idea of birth. And the question is, how could the Beis Din really know the full extent of sincerity of a person? We know that experienced Beis Din usually has a good idea when somebody is sincere. And indeed, I can tell you that being involved with conversions for close to 3 decades, we can tell when somebody is sincere and when somebody is not sincere. And looking back into the conversions done in the past 5 years, we see that the vast majority of those converts really make us proud. And it got better over the years. But ultimately, how could a person, a human being who is not a prophet, how could he be sure that the conversion is not a farce? That it's not just something that's done in order to be able to fool the Beis Din, in order to achieve something, in order to get married, or in order to have a certain place in the community? The answer is, as the Rambam says, that when it comes to certain areas of Jewish law, we say Torah lo b'shamayim hi. Torah is not in heavens. Hashem not only doesn't expect us to be prophets, but he doesn't even expect Jewish law to be run by prophecy. And the best example is the idea of witnesses in Jewish law. We have witnesses that are involved both in civil law and criminal law. And sometimes the most severe decisions are made based on a testimony of witnesses. In times of the Sanhedrin, times of the temple, for example, there were even capital punishments carried out. Now, it's true that in order to be able to administer the capital punishment, it was very, very difficult. Because in order to do that, you needed to have, first of all, the witnesses had to warn a person committing a particular crime. The person had to acknowledge that he heard them and that he understood what they were telling him. And he had to immediately, without any kind of a procrastination, he had to continue to perform the same crime as he has done before. In a way, a person had to really want to commit suicide in order for him to be executed. But it's more than that. Even if that happened, the witnesses had to be interrogated by the Jewish court, and the interrogations were carried out separately, and they had to be totally consistent. If there were certain even a minute inconsistency in a testimony of the witnesses, even if it wasn't directly related to the crime, there was no punishment administered. And the Rambam Maimonides asks a question. Even if all of these things happen, and the witnesses, they pass the test, and they're completely consistent, how could the Bezdin be sure that it wasn't an elaborate masterminded plan in order to be able to make sure that this person is executed? There's always a possibility of that, even though it's very, very difficult. And the Rambam says that that is the power of Torah. Torah says that it's irrelevant whether we as human beings can be 100% sure. The Torah has given certain power to the witnesses, and if the witnesses pass the test and the testimony is completely accepted, it's the results of the testimony has to be carried out. That's the Jewish law. And it's not the concern of the rabbis or not prophets to know that maybe you can never be 100% sure, and it's always a possibility that it was all put together as an elaborate evil plan. The same thing applies to the question of conversions. The sages use the term that the rabbis are not only facilitators, but they also are given the discretion to be able to come to a decision whether this particular candidate is worthy of conversion. And the words which are used in Halacha, that it is lefi re'ois eine hadayan. It is up to the discretion of the judge and the Bezdin. So it's a little bit subjective. Not even a little bit. I mean, there are rules that are customarily used and standards used by Botidin. But if you go back to the Talmud, you will see a very big difference between certain dayanim. In the first century, there was a Hillel who had one approach to converts, and you had Shammai who had the opposite approach. And the Talmud does not say one was correct and one was incorrect. Both approaches are legitimate because the Dayan is given the discretion. He has to be comfortable that this particular ger, this particular convert, is worthy to enter the Jewish people, because as we know, there's no mitzvah to convert. I think Yiddishkeit, I think Judaism is unique among religions in the fact that it's the only religion that I know that doesn't try to convince other people to convert. Every other religion, whether they actively proselytize, whether they actively send missionaries, but it's part of the belief that every person has to convert to their religion, and if not, they are damned for eternity. It doesn't matter whether it's Catholicism, whether it's Greek Orthodoxy, whether it's Islam, whether it's Mormons, whether it's Seventh-day Adventists, Baptists. In all of these religions, they really believe, and some of them could be very, very often very nice people who don't try to show any hatred or any negativity towards other people, but that's part and parcel of their theology, what they believe in. And Judaism doesn't believe that. Judaism believes that the world was created of many people. Hashem has a purpose for everybody. The Jewish people are a nation that has a particular mission to be Am HaNivcher, to be the chosen people, to carry out certain Hashem's will in this world, to create certain level of divinity in this world. And they are given 613 commandments. And there are many people that were created who are very fine, ethical, good human beings. They're created in the image of God. They can be close to God, they can do God's will, but once they are born not Jewish, there's no mitzvah for them, there's no command for them to convert. On the contrary, as you can see, we make it quite difficult for them. And therefore, because it's not a mitzvah, there's no actual, one of the 613 mitzvahs that says that there's an obligation for the Bezdin to convert people. It's something that is done in order to assist people that are deemed to be extremely sincere and extremely worthy. And there's absolutely no obligation to do that. We talk about the, on the very first meeting, we discuss with the potential candidates all of the rules that the Bezdin has, and we tell them quite clearly that only if those rules are followed and fulfilled, then we will convert them, otherwise not. So we see that there is a concept of discretion, that it can vary from Bezdin to Bezdin, and it can vary from Dayan to Dayan. Now, when a potential candidate, when he enters the process, and he says he wants to, and especially when he comes to the end of the process, and he or she are about to be converted, it's a very sacred obligation which they're undertaking. And the obligation is a covenant which they are entering between a number of participants. First of all, Hashem himself, God himself, the Jewish people, and also the Beth Din, because the Beth Din is putting the trust in a particular candidate. And the trust is, and the agreement is, that this particular decision is not for any particular amount of time. It's not only that they're practicing in order to convert. It's not for a week or for 2 weeks, for a month or a year. It's a decision for life. We know that sometimes things happen and people renege on their responsibilities and they start dropping things. It's something which is not, we don't believe it's ethical and the right thing to do, but it's a fact of life. It could happen to a Jewish person that is born into a religious family, and then something happens to him and he decides that, right now I want to have a freer life. There's no police, believe in a democracy, and ultimately all we can do is inspire, educate, and try to guide people, but we cannot police people what they're doing. And the same thing invariably can happen to a person who is converted. And the question is, do the words of Chazal, of the sages, that ger shechozer lesurei, that a ger that went back to his old ways, is ki Yisrael mumordomi, he's like a Jewish apostate, he has a status of a Jewish apostate, a Jewish heretic? Or is there more to it? And the answer is that over here we also have, to a certain extent, discretion of the Bezdin. What does discretion come into it? On one hand, the Talmud clearly tells us that a sincere conversion cannot be undone. Once a person converted sincerely, nothing that he can do later can make him a non-Jew. It's a question of a soul. We can't just take a soul, take it in and out, and it's not a piece of furniture that you can sort of move it around. But at the same time, sometimes we can question the integrity and the sincerity of a ger by the actions. Obviously, if you have a situation, and it doesn't happen in real life, but let's say a situation that the person went through a whole process of conversion. And by the way, the reason why, as I mentioned in the last lecture, the reason why today the process takes longer than it used to take in times of a Talmud, in times of Maimonides and so on and so forth, because in those days there wasn't such a thing as somebody converting and not being religious. The whole Jewish community was religious. And that's why conversions basically took 1 day for a woman and maybe a month for a man, because for men it had to be the few weeks between the circumcision and the immersion. But the process was described last time. If they've proven their sincerity and they were taught a number of things, both 13 principles of faith, as well as some of the sprinkling of certain laws, there was no doubt in the minds of the Bezdin that if they will remain in the Jewish community, they'll continue to be religious, because there was nothing else. That was the life that everybody led. It's only in the 20th century, in certain communities, that we have a situation when somebody could convert, and if he didn't go through the whole process of practicing being religious, he will look around and he will see very, very nice traditional Jews, but they're not religious. They don't keep Shabbos, don't keep kosher. And if he's going to follow the example, it wouldn't be a proper conversion. So today, when a person goes through a year and a half, 2 years, whatever the process takes, it's very difficult to imagine that the next day after going to the mikveh, he will go to a church and he'll suddenly act as a devout Christian. But if that would happen, you wouldn't blame the Beth Din for doubting that their intention wasn't really sincere. That he wanted to basically to convert, and now he wants to do whatever he wants. That's an extreme example. But the example comes to show that sometimes there are certain actions that could make the Beth Din doubt whether the particular conversion was really sincere or not. And Moshe Feinstein, who was a great halachist, a great halachic authority of the 20th century, he did one time retroactively annulled a conversion. And he explained, he said, it became clear to him from certain evidence that occurred in the behavior of the convert that the conversion wasn't sincere. And therefore he said he's not coming along to nullify an existing conversion. He's coming along to say that since it's lefi re'os eine hadayin, it's according to the discretion and according to what the dayan understands, I cannot believe there was sincere conversion. So what he advised his students is that it's not always easy for a dayan to determine. As I said, we're not prophets. Sometimes there's a very clear indication there was certain lack of honesty and lack of integrity in the way that what happened immediately after the conversion. And sometimes it's difficult to tell. There's also another problem, that if the Bezdin will start having different rules for different people, they will not understand that concept of integrity. So sometimes it's important to have a policy in hand in order to be able to avoid situations where somebody will renege on their commitment early on in the game. And again, I'm not coming along and saying that when somebody is, throw something away a year later or 2 years or 3 years later, somehow it makes it better when you do it later. A commitment is a commitment. When somebody converts, it's a little bit like a marriage. You marry somebody for better or for worse. You don't say, as soon as I experience certain problems in life, automatically I'm going to, the one that will be the first to suffer is my Yiddishkeit. The commitment that a person made with Hashem and with the Jewish people is that we're here for better or for worse. People have different challenges and people have different problems in life. And that's not an excuse. Again, we're not coming to judge everybody, but that's what it is. But nevertheless, inevitably, when it happens too soon, you can have a great amount of doubt. So Moshe Feinstein suggested a period of either 6 or 12 months to be able to determine whether or not it was sad collection of circumstances that the person ultimately didn't live up to the commitments, or is it something which is more suspicious? And he says that you could be justified much more when it happened sooner after the conversion. So as a result, many Botei Din, many Beth Dins started a policy not to give a certificate for a year after the conversion, or for half a year, whatever they decide. Different Botei Din have different policies. We in Sydney, and I will share with you a story that happened. Obviously, it's all anonymous, you will not know who I'm talking about. We in Sydney started this policy, I remember, in 2010. And it happened as a result of an unfortunate incident. There was a young man who was converting to, and I will tell you the whole story and I explain to you because it needs explanation. There was a young man who was converting, and he looked like a very, very sincere convert. He became fully religious. He went around with a beard. Not that we expect every convert to grow a beard, because there's some customs in some communities, in Hasidic communities, it's part and parcel of one's appearance, it's that have a beard. In some communities that trim the beard, sometimes they will not have a beard as long as they don't shave with a razor. Shaving with a razor is a biblical prohibition. But the Sydney Beth Din is a Orthodox Beth Din that basically looks after the whole community. And we have candidates from different shuls, from different communities, different customs. And therefore there's no particular, as long as halacha is kept, there's no demand to keep a particular standard, as long as the minimal Orthodox standard, which is demanded from any person who is a Orthodox observant Jew. And but this particular young man, he was actually a what they call ultra-Orthodox. He wanted to be ultra-Orthodox member of the Jewish people, and he did his process quite quickly. He also said he He had no girlfriend. He also said that he would like to go to yeshiva in Israel for Balei Tshuva, for people who are becoming frum, a very good yeshiva, which we approved of. And his sponsoring rabbi, the rabbi in the shul that he went to, said, look, we think that he's ready to convert, even though it was just a little bit over a year, which was quite a short amount of time for, but because he's going to yeshiva, he'll achieve in yeshiva much more than somebody else will just remain in Sydney. He'll study and he will really grow both in knowledge and in observance. And we tested him, and he passed the test, and we did everything had to be done. The Hatofas Dambris, a touch of a needle because he was already circumcised. We did a mikveh, and about, I can't remember how long, maybe a week or 2 weeks later, suddenly all his plans change. His beard comes off. Suddenly we found out he has a girlfriend. Suddenly he's not going to yeshiva in Israel. So I called up the secretary. I said, and those days we used to give a certificate right away. So I told the secretary, hold off the certificate. Don't give it to him. He said, just came 5 minutes ago, literally, and he took it. Too late. So I called up. I don't remember if those days, I don't think they had WhatsApps. Maybe they had texts. I can't remember. Certainly they had emails. So I emailed him. I called him. I tried to get in contact with him. He went underground. Nowhere to be seen. Basically lost all contact. And I really felt that there was a level of dishonesty. I mean, it's hard to believe because, how could a person fool everybody? But to be able to do that, again, it wasn't because they didn't go to yeshiva. We don't force everybody. Most of our candidates don't go to yeshiva after they convert full time. But over here, we're talking about a person that actually made a certain perception of himself. And one of the reasons why we a little bit made his conversion a little bit quicker than usual, because of the fact that he wanted to start a new year in the yeshiva, not to miss out on a semester. And you can imagine that we really felt it was a very unusual case. We decided there and then to follow the example of many other Botei Din and to withhold the certificate. But what can you do? There's nothing we can do. We can't send a armed force to look for him. That's life. Sometimes the Talmud acknowledges sometimes there could be people who are dishonest. That's why. Anyway, about 2 years later, he appears in Melbourne, this young man. And he has a girlfriend that wants to convert. And he attends different shuls. And I received phone calls from rabbis of different shuls that he went to in order to ask about his status. The question is, why did they call me? The first reason why they called me is because there's actually a normal practice that even though somebody comes with a certificate, you still call the Beth Din just to find out everything is legit. And second of all, it was quite unusual that he's coming with a certificate he converted and he's coming with a non-Jewish girlfriend in order to convert her now. But what's a righteous convert doing with a non-Jewish girlfriend? So I told all of the rabbis who called me up that as far as we are concerned, the certificate has to be ignored. It was received not in a proper fashion, and therefore they shouldn't accept him. They can accept him. You can come and you can go to synagogue. Nobody is not accepted, but he shouldn't get called up to the Torah. You shouldn't be part of the minyan, and so on and so forth. And this went for a while until one of the rabbis called me up and says, "Look, he wants to know what he should do, and he wants to know what's going on. Why isn't he accepted?" So I said, "Ask him to give me a call." So the young man gave me a call, and I said to him, "Look, I want to be honest with you. We are canceling your conversion, and your certificate is null and void. And the reason is because immediately after the conversion, you suddenly went back on all of the commitments and all of the undertakings that you've made to the Beth Din. But more importantly than that, we're prepared to be very naive. We're very believing people. We're prepared to accept any story that comes to us. We're not, we rather always give benefit of a doubt for everything that happens in this world. However, all you have to do is come and talk to us, and discuss with us, but you disappeared. How does it look that you've taken the certificate, and as soon as you got it, you're not to be seen?" And he says, "You're right. It's something that, he never really explained fully what happened, but he asked me, what should I do now? I said two things. The first thing you should do is send back the certificate, and don't keep a copy because a copy will not help you. Just send the certificate back to the Sydney Beth Din. And the second thing, go to the Melbourne Beth Din, go to Rabbi Mordechai Gutnick in Melbourne, and begin the process for conversion for yourself too, not just for your girlfriend. In the meantime, I've given a call to Rabbi Mordechai Gutnick, who's the head of the Melbourne Beth Din, and I discussed the matter with him. I explained to him that over here it's a very, very interesting situation. And that here I want to give a halachic component to what I'm saying. Can we be sure that he wasn't sincere when he converted? Obviously not. It's very possible that he was sincere. Something happened to him. But the way halacha works is, like I said before, Hashem doesn't expect us to be prophets. And therefore, ultimately, the way that a convert is accepted in this physical world is by a certificate. And if there's no certificate, he will not have the benefit of a certificate from a recognized Beth Din. He will not have the benefit of being accepted. Nobody will marry. No Orthodox rabbi will conduct a wedding, a chuppah, for somebody converted if there's no proof from a recognized Beth Din and confirmation from Beth Din that he is converted. As far as I'm concerned, can I be sure that he's not Jewish? I can be sure. But it's a suffix, it's a doubt. And once there is a doubt, we cannot fully accept the person as Jewish, and we cannot marry him if there's a doubt. There are many times that people come to us and the identity cannot be proven. It doesn't mean that if somebody is 50-50, for example, Jewish, even if it's 80-20, even if it's 90-10, we have to know that somebody is 100% Jewish. You cannot be a Jewish almost for sure. It has to be for sure. And therefore, in a particular case, when the sincerity of a conversion is doubted, I discussed with Rabbi the head of the Melbourne Beth Din. I said, look, I will do everything possible that he should be converted, because right now his position is in doubt. And when he is converted, the tevilah, the immersion, should be done without a blessing, because it's a suffix, it's a doubt. Whenever there's a doubt, you don't make a blessing. And I must say, and first of all, every time I came to Melbourne, the young man came to speak to me. He never had any ill feelings towards us about it. I think he understood where we're coming from, that we would have been ready to speak to him. We weren't ready just to cancel the conversion if whatever happened. But the story was, at the end of the day, the conversion of his girlfriend didn't work out. She dropped out in the middle and she left him. He continued, and he completed his conversion with the Melbourne Beth Din. And afterwards, he went to the United States. And in the United States, he met a very nice religious girl from a religious community. And he sent me a beautiful photo right after the wedding, just to give me some nachas and to see that everything at the end worked out very well. But he told me something interesting. And that was coming from him. In one of our meetings that we had in Melbourne, he said to me, you know, whatever happened to me, at a certain time he explained to me what happened. I'm not going to go into it. And I told him that whatever happened, he should have spoken to us. We would have helped him to overcome whatever challenges that he went through. But what he told me was that he feels that what happened to him is a lesson to in the process of conversion. Because as you should know, that a lot of the people who are converting, they talk to each other. There's different groups. In those days, there was a email group. Today, there's different chats. And he says, this sent a very clear lesson that what I've done wasn't a proper thing to do. And I didn't get away with it. And he wasn't resentful about it. He was actually understanding and happy about it. He says, look, at least whatever happened to me, it'll be in a way a lesson that, there has to be a certain trust and a certain reciprocal behavior between the Bezdin and the converts, that whatever expectations are agreed upon, they should be carried out. Now I want to tell you something else in and then we'll have some questions. When it comes to a question of conversion, we have also a bit of a balance. On one hand, it's what the Beth, as far as this world is concerned, and how the person is accepted in this world, it's what the Beth Din does, that's what counts. When the Beth Din converts somebody and they say that he's a kosher convert and they give him a certificate, that person is a full-fledged Jew. But let's take a theoretical question, a theoretical situation. Let's say there was a person that deep down he knows that he or she wasn't sincere. They going through the appearance and doing whatever has to be done, but they don't really, they didn't really accept the commandments. And maybe when nobody looks at them, they break the commandments. And they say, look, nobody knows. The Beth Din will never find out. We don't do it in public. And therefore, they are accepted as Jewish everywhere. But they also know that conversion is not a ceremony. And even though the acceptance of conversion depends on the Beis Din and the confirmation of the Beis Din, but ultimately the neshama that is Hashem sends into you does depend on one's sincerity, on the fact that one has accepted the mitzvahs. And one is, when they went to the actual, when they said those words, one day, maybe I'll tell you, it's a very, very emotional moment when a candidate actually pronounces that acceptance from the Beth Din, and moments later they go under the water, and when they're under the water, that's when the Neshama comes into them. So if they were not sincere, they have to question, did the Neshama really come into me? And I want to tell you that a few times, it happened maybe 3 or 4 times here in Sydney, that we had a young man or young lady getting married, and they would call me, and they would say, look, my mother converted before I was born, and today she's not so religious anymore. And I don't want to. I'm religious. I don't want to live in doubt. I'm worried. Maybe when she converted, I don't know what her intention was, and therefore, I would like to go to the mikveh again. I would like to do it. Nobody should know about it, and I certainly wouldn't make this person to be, his status to be of, it will be done purely what's called the chumrah, because nobody wants to live even with 1% doubt. But it shows you that people themselves, sometimes they're not interested that they should, after 120 years, they should come to the next world, and they tell them, you're in the wrong chamber. You belong next door to the other one, right? So ultimately, it's, apart from anything else, it's also a undertaking that the potential ger makes to Hashem, and the sincerity of accepting mitzvahs, that which brings a neshama into the person. And we're not talking over here about that a person can make mistakes, everybody can do the best they can, but sometimes they would either unintentionally or they're not on a level to do everything as a tzaddik would do, as a righteous person. I mean, there's always different levels of observance. Sometimes people can only study so much Torah every day, and other people can do more. That doesn't affect one's conversion when everybody tries. But when we're talking about living basically a halachic, orthodox lifestyle, and the fact that sometimes those young brides or grooms came to us and requested us, we would never suggested it to them. It was coming totally from them. But somehow because right now the parents who converted maybe were not so observant anymore, they had a little doubt about the sincerity during the conversion. They themselves asked, what, we don't want to be 99% sure that we're Jewish, we want to be 100% sure that we're Jewish. And that's what they've done. So just to conclude this particular thought, and then we'll have some questions. The conversion itself is a unique phenomenon that God gave into this world, which is probably the greatest, biggest miracle after birth. Just like you have this concept of a child being born, you also have a person that can actually acquire a new soul. We are told something interesting, that before God has given the Torah to the Jewish people, He offered it to all the other nations. That's what the Talmud tells us, the sages tell us. There were 70 nations in the world, altogether 71 nations. 70 nations plus the Jewish people. And He didn't want afterwards that there should be a complaint that if you would have offered the Torah to us, or the Ten Commandments to us, we would have accepted it. So he gave it to the sons of Esau, to the sons of Ishmael, to Moab, to Edom, to all different nations. He has offered the Torah, and each one asked, "What does it say in the Torah?" So he would say either "Do not kill," "Do not steal," "Don't commit adultery," "Don't believe more than one God," and each nation rejected it for the reasons of their own cultural and behavior that they were used to live in a certain manner. In those days, life wasn't as civilized as today. In the last 2,000 years, Judaism created other religions that have a lot of the values, even though the religion itself may be very far from Yiddishkeit, but they have certain values which it took from the Bible. But before that, before the Common Era, most of the world were idol worshippers, and they led a life of cruelty, of murder, of theft, of immorality, idol worship, and so on and so forth. So each nation didn't accept. So once a great Kabbalist said that even though as a whole the nations didn't accept the Torah, only the Jewish people said Na'aseh v'nishma, we'll accept it even before we learn it, before we understand it. But there were certain individual souls, individual people that did want to accept the Torah, but they didn't because the nation as a whole didn't accept it. And those souls later became righteous converts. Because they already had a connection to Torah and they wanted to accept the Torah, they're the ones that eventually became, that they converted. And therefore conversion is a very, very mind-boggling phenomena that a person can, goes to a mikveh. We can see that a person can go to take, go to the biggest spa in the world, and it's not going to change him. But the waters of the mikveh, and done properly, together with acceptance of mitzvahs and together with the Beis Din, the whole process actually makes a transformation of a person. But that transformation requires a commitment. And the commitment is for life. And whenever we're talking about over here how certain policies the business to make, whether it's for 6 months or for a year, in order to be able to do the very best, to be able to maximize the assurance that they have that ultimately when a potential ger or geyeris, they accepted the mitzvahs, they did it sincerely, but it doesn't mean that ultimately there is a justification after any amount of time to be able to drop Yiddishkeit, because Yiddishkeit is something that, again, nobody forced anybody to become Jewish. It's something that is a really, there's no ethical or moral obligation for somebody who wasn't born Jewish to become Jewish. Once they become, it becomes a lifetime of commitment. So the Torah holds righteous converts on the highest pedestal. We actually have three times a day we have a blessing in the Shmoneh Esrei, in the morning, afternoon, and evening service, where we bless and we mention the righteous converts and what an asset they are to the Jewish people. So let us hope and pray that this lesson gave a bit of understanding of what it's all about. Again, it's not meant to answer every single situation or every single case that possibly could happen, but it gives you an idea of the parameters of what acceptance of mitzvahs in connection with Giyur is all about. Any questions?
Yeah, so the first question is as follows. Someone is saying, I have a friend that when he was, that we grew up together, and from about age 9, and he was a convert together with his family. And as he grew up, when he was around 15 or 16 years old, he dropped observance on his own. His family kept on being religious, but he dropped it. What would be his status?
Right. So I'm going to, again, it's hard to be able to say without knowing details, but I'm going to give you some parameters. I've mentioned in one of my lectures, could have been the lecture where I spoke about conversion altogether, that the logistics, halachic logistics behind conversion of minors is very different to the conversion of adults. With adults, the main part of conversion is acceptance of mitzvahs. With young children who are minors, it can be done in a mature way. whether they get converted when they are 2 years old, when there's no maturity whatsoever, or even when they 6, 7, 8, 9, according to Halacha, it's not considered to be something which has the same validity of Kabbalas and mitzvahs as for an adult, or acceptance of mitzvahs. And therefore, the Talmud tells us that the conversion of minors are done, they are done as a schus, as a merit for the child. Under normal circumstances, I'll give you a few different situations. This merit lasts until the child, whether it's a he or she, becomes an adult according to Jewish law, which is approximately around bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah. 12 years old for girls and 13 years old for boys, approximately. At that point, the Talmud tells us that the child, or a newly becoming adult, has the choice to continue with being Jewish or not to continue being Jewish. That's why it's important for them to know. I've even told you a story, which I won't repeat now. I told you a story that once happened in such a case. So what usually happens is that the father or the mother both, they bring me the child around the time of bar mitzvah, bas mitzvah, and we talk to them. And in virtually all the cases that we have, they all are part of a very nice, observant Jewish families. And all I'm telling them, I get them in a very informal conversation. I get them to tell me how happy they are that they're Jewish and how they're happy to do mitzvahs. And if they're already 13, they put in tefillin. And at that point, when they express their desire to be Jewish, they can never ever go back on it anymore. That's the law. Once they have known that they have converted, and they know that really it's their choice, and they decided that they want to become Jewish, if later on in life they become non-religious, they're still considered Jewish. I've spoken to you before that there is a very authoritative opinion of a sage called the Chasam Sofer, who lived in the 19th century in Bratislava, used to be called Pressburg in olden times. And he brought a lot of proof, again, that certain things could be a argument among the halachic authorities. In his opinion, the only time that a convert who converted as a child has the prerogative and the choice to change their mind, only if they were adopted. But if they converted with one of the parents, either the father or the mother, the biological connection is such a strong schus, such a strong merit, they can never go back on it. Nevertheless, in order that we should be able to make sure the child is Jewish according to all opinions, we still carry out the same policy even with those kids who converted with the parents. They still come to us at the time of bar mitzvah, bas mitzvah. They sort of reconfirm. It doesn't have to be formal. There's no going to mikveh again. There's no doing it before Beth Din. They reconfirm and we put it down in their file. They confirm their desire and the enthusiasm and the joy that they are Jewish, and that's it. They can't change their mind. I just dealt this last week with a very, very fascinating story that happened. Again, I'm going to obviously change all the facts that nobody will know what it's about, but there was a situation that a particular a lady contacted the Beth Din, and she wanted to get the paperwork that she's Jewish. And what happened was, when she came to see me, what happened was that they whole family, father, mother, and her and one of her and her sibling, converted in mid-80s, and they were very, very frum, and they went to a very religious school. The boy and the girl, she converted when she was, I believe she was something like 8 years old, and her brother was even younger. And they went to a religious school for a while, and something happened to the parents. The parents, something snapped, and they took them out of the school, and at a certain point they even abandoned the children. So there was something very, very disturbing over there. But now she came to see me, and she wants to sort of come back to Yiddishkeit, and she wants to get a paper and everything else after many, many years. And she told me the whole story, and I said to her, she asked me about, and Jewish status, if I can give a paper. And I said to her, it's interesting that when you were converted as a minor, and when your parents took you out of the school and tore you away from Yiddishkeit, you already were like 15 years old. So with you, there's no question. You already were fully immersed in it, and you're fully enthusiastic about being Jewish when you were bas mitzvah 12 years old. Your brother, it's interesting. I said your brother, it's a question mark because it's an argument about it because he was under bar mitzvah when he was taken out. So she tells me, I listened to your lecture on YouTube. It's one of the lectures I've given on Zoom in one of our classes. And you said that if somebody were converted together with the parents, they can never renege. That's what she told me. I said, I'm very impressed that you not only listened to the lecture, but you actually remembered what I said. And I said to her, that's why I said there's an argument. But I told her that I agree that her brother is also Jewish for two reasons. First of all, he was very reluctant when he was taken out from the from Yiddishkeit, from the school, and also, like I said before, the Chasam Sofer was a very, very great authority. He said that if somebody converted together with the parents, they don't have the luxury to be able to change their mind even when they reach the age of 13. So I said, I mentioned just as a by the way statement that there's an argument about it, but you're right that you listened correctly to the lecture, and I was quite happy that not only she listened to it, but she understood it and she remembered it. Any other questions?
Yes. What if the
so just I want to finish off. So if indeed this particular person that you asked a question about, at the age of 13 he really wanted to be Jewish, only later he somehow, for whatever reason, whether because of family circumstances, whatever happened, but then he's still Jewish. Yeah.
All right. What if the Beth Din of one country doesn't accept the conversion of the Beth Din of another country?
Right. So it's not a question of a country. I think I discussed it before, and I think that this question, if in order to be explained seriously, on a serious level, should be properly related to, not just in passing, because we have a situation where non-Orthodox conversions are obviously not accepted. That's not a question. But we know that we have a certain lists of accepted Bate Din, and I think it's important to explain. I mentioned it also in one of the lectures, but I think it's important to explain rationale behind it, that it's nothing to do with any kind of a political competition, God forbid, between any Bate Din. There are good reasons why, and it's nothing to do with the country, it's to do with the standards and the integrity of Bate Din, how much they adhere to the proper standards, and nothing to do with country or anything else. But there is a lists that were created by the rabbinical establishments of Bate Din, which are universally accepted. And maybe in another lecture, if Aaron, if you remind me, I will give you a few different interesting examples of other, what would be the criteria by which other Orthodox Bate Din would be either accepted or not accepted. That's an interesting question, but I would like to deal with it properly.
All right, next question. If someone is ready to get married, how long can you hold their conversion certificate?
Okay, so what happens is that when we're talking about a couple, we actually prefer that a marriage takes place as soon as possible after the conversion. It's interesting that there is in a Talmud and in the codes, it says that there should be a 92-day or 90 clear day period after a get, after a divorce, and after conversion. And the reason for women, and the reason why, is because in order to determine the status of a child, if she was already pregnant, and pregnancy it took 3 months to be able to recognize when somebody's pregnant. So whether or not the child was conceived before the divorce or after the divorce, whether or not it was conceived before conversion, after conversion, it would have certain halachic ramifications. And therefore it says there should be 92-day period. However, our Beth Din, already close to 20 years ago, we have established a policy, which I will explain, a halachic policy, that when it comes to conversions, we usually, unless the couple convinces us, we will try to do the wedding almost back to back after the conversion. In other words, if they convert, let's say on a Friday, then 2 days later we'll organize a chuppah, or we'll already plan before. The reason is because there's a halachic concept called loy plug. Loy plug means that sometimes the sages have made a certain legislation which is not subject to logical changes. Now, legislation was made, and it's irrelevant whether it applies or not. So in case of gittin, in case of divorce, it's irrelevant if a woman is already postmenopausal, if she's already will not have a child. It's irrelevant if she had a hysterectomy and she cannot have children. It's irrelevant if she lived already for 10 years apart from her ex-husband and there's no chance she'll be pregnant from him. When it came to gittin, for a certain reason, they made a legislation which wasn't bound by any details. It had to be done loy plug, without any exceptions. But according to a great halachic authority called Noide Beyehuda, who lived in Prague in the 1700s, he brought proof from the Talmud that when it comes to conversion, the legislation does apply, but not loy plug. It only applies when it's needed. And therefore, if a woman, for example, is past menopause, or she's we know that she cannot be pregnant, she's elderly, whatever it is, you could waive the 92-day separation. So we decided to do it. We decided to give the female convert who's about to get married a pregnancy test, and based on the test, when it says she's not pregnant, to allow her to marry right away. The reason why we did it, not because we're trying to be lenient, we're actually trying to be strict. We don't fully trust the couples who are living together beforehand. They should be able to handle this 3-month separation. So we understand human nature a little bit too much. We had actually 3 times it happened that the woman found out on the day of her conversion she was pregnant. She didn't know that before. One time the husband almost fainted. He didn't have a clue about it, and she found out on the day of the conversion. But what was the question again? The question was...
So the question was, how long can you hold their certificate if they're married?
So if they're getting married, we obviously have to write the ksuba for them. But we keep the ksuba together with the conversion certificate, and we give it together a year later. And I was asked many times, is it kosher according to Jewish law that a woman should be without a marriage certificate? The answer is 100%. There's no law that says that it has to be in any particular place, as long as she knows where it is. And as long as it's kept safely in the Bezdin, then it's considered as if they are living together. The marriage document, the ksuba, is an integral part of a married couple. They cannot live together without this being written and signed. But it doesn't matter whether it's in her house, whether it's in her mother's house, whether it's in the mother-in-law's house. No, mother-in-law shouldn't be, because it belongs to the wife. So it has to be either in her house or mother's house, or it could be in the Bezdin. But if everything goes well and they're still with the program, so to speak, a year later, they receive the conversion certificate together with the ksuba, with marriage certificate, a year later.
All right, next question. What is the difference between a Jew who was born Jewish but is not keeping kosher or doesn't follow the commandments, to a person who was born Jewish but never lived in a Jewish house and didn't know much about the commandments? They are both Jewish, but one is ignorance and one is 100% sincere, but has difficulties to follow. And if the person who didn't grow in a Jewish house goes through the process of conversion to learn, will he or she get a neshama feeling? And if yes, how and why, if he already has one?
It's a complicated...
let me break it down.
Break it down.
I think it's a bit confusing because maybe the person doesn't understand that a Jew doesn't need a conversion if he's never following the commandments.
Right.
But he's asking basically what's the difference between a Jew who was observing their whole life to a Jew who just didn't know better.
Right. So there is a difference in a Talmud and Jewish law about a person that was educated and left it and a person who was never educated. The person who was never educated, he is called Tinnek Shenishba, a child who was taken into captivity. Like an example I've given in one of our first lectures, if a child is kidnapped from his parents and he doesn't know that he's Jewish, his neshama he is Jewish. His neshama is suffering because it's living in an unnatural habitat. The neshama, the Jewish soul, wants to express itself. He wants to have spiritual nourishment by the body keeping the commandments. And when the body doesn't keep the commandments, then the neshama suffers. However, the person cannot be held liable. He does not know any difference. And most of the current halachic authorities, including the Lubavitcher Rebbe, has ruled that the majority of Jews who were raised in a non-religious, secular atmosphere, they are in the category of Tinnik Shenishba. And the level of liability is very different to somebody that knows better and rejects it. Again, I'm not coming along over here to be a policeman who judges people and says, Hashem is the one to know what's happening in every soul and what are the challenges everybody's going through. So I'm not coming here to tell you exactly how much each person is liable. I'm giving general rules. That is the reason why when we spoke about a ger shechozer l'surei, that a convert, a righteous convert, who converted properly, but afterwards he rejected it, he is called a Yisrael Mumar, a Jewish heretic. The reason why he's called a heretic, because you cannot call him Tinnik Shenishba, you can't call him a child who was kidnapped, because he obviously knew better. He learned, he studied, he understands the value and the necessity of commandments. Now, one of the things that we explain to prospect, again, I'm extrapolating on the question because it was asked in a very multifaceted way, so I'm going to try to cover some of the points. One of the things that we explain to candidates who come to convert, we tell them that you may look around and you may think, listen, there's a lot of Jewish people who are born Jewish, and for whatever reason they're not keeping the commandments. Why is it that we have to keep the commandments and they don't? So first of all, the answer is that every Jewish person has to keep the commandments. The ones who are converted and the ones who are born Jewish. However, when it comes to a person who was born Jewish, as wrong as it is not to keep the commandments, you cannot take away one's Jewishness once you're born Jewish. But when one converts, there's no conversion without acceptance of commandments. That's the difference. In other words, a person who was born Jewish, that's his lot, that's his destiny. He has to keep the commandments, and if he doesn't, he really creates a terrible liability for himself. But he is Jewish. When a person is converting, why would he want to convert if he doesn't want to keep the commandments? When he is or she is not Jewish, they only have to keep 7 commandments, which are given to all of humanity. And when they keep those commandments, they are ethical, moral human beings. Why would they want to become Jewish and then throw it away and receive all the liabilities and the punishments from above, which the Bible gives for the Jewish person who violates it? It doesn't make sense. So we explain to them that the only logical purpose to convert, if you will keep the commandments. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. For a Jewish person, also it doesn't make sense not to keep the commandments. But over there, we can only do our very best to inspire, to teach, to guide, to educate, and hopefully our Jewish brothers and sisters will start coming back to observant Yiddishkeit.
All right, we have time for a few more questions.
It's up to you. If you decide.
We'll do about 3 more questions, okay? So we have one question that was actually sent in from after the last series of a Kohen.
A Kohen, yeah.
So someone is asking like this: I met a guy in Chabad Bangkok who is a Kohen and he has a Thai wife. We all know that the Kohen can't marry a convert, and she isn't converted yet. But the problem is she's pregnant, and even if she converted, she can't marry the Kohen. So what's the deal with the child? What can we do about this child?
I'm thinking we have such cases. We deal with a number of such cases, and there's not a black and white answer to be able to answer the question. But I'll answer to the best of my ability.
They said they also, if you want, you can respond directly to them. Maybe I can get you in contact with them. Maybe.
Yeah. In short, I think I will respond directly to them because it's a very, very nuanced question. It's not a black and white question. The problem with this question is, not with the question is a very good question. The problem with the situation is that it's quite correct that a Kohen is not allowed to marry somebody converted. A Kohen has certain limitations who he can marry. It has nothing to do with the any sort of negative stigma attached to any of the people that he can't marry. Nothing to do with it. Kohen has a certain type of specific laws as far as where he can go, the fact that he can't walk into a cemetery, the fact that he can not marry certain people, and so on and so forth. And so when a Kohen is involved with a non-Jewish lady, they have no future altogether. When it comes to anybody else, there is a possibility, if they both will decide to embrace the commandments, there is a kosher conversion. For a Geyeris, she can never marry a Kohen, and therefore we cannot convert her knowing that she will be married to a Kohen. And with the children, under normal circumstances, we don't convert young children without the mothers. We want both parents to be Jewish in order for them to convert, because in order for it to be conducive for them to live in the religious homes. In certain situations where, out of lack of knowledge, it happens sometimes that there were a very sincere situations when a woman wanted to convert, and she embraced completely all of the laws of Judaism. She keeps kosher, she keeps Shabbos, festivals, and she wants to convert. But unfortunately, we found out that her partner is a Kohen. In such a situation when we are assured that the children will be growing up in a totally religious atmosphere, will go to religious school and everything else, sometimes we would convert the kids in such a case. But again, it's a very, very individual, and I don't mind talking about the individual case to the people involved.
Okay, next question. What are reasons provided which imply sincerity, and what kinds of doubts are regularly expressed and must be seriously considered? Basically, like, what shows like a sign of maybe this person isn't sincere, and what shows a sign that person is sincere?
It's very, very numerous, too numerous to be able to but the general the general answer is that it's something which is very obvious. When people are sincere and they are enthusiastic about what they're doing, and they're doing it with a lot of will, and a person cannot hide their observance or lack of observance in the community, because Judaism is not a religion in a vacuum. It's not something that you do in your own home, and people are part of a community, and it's something that we know people are keeping and not keeping. Look, there were cases, we had a situation one time where a particular couple, when one of them was Jewish, I'm not going to go into exactly what is what, but again, I'm very particular about not giving any clues we're talking about. But as a couple that are sincere and they're keeping everything correctly, but because of a certain pressure at one point, within a certain amount of time of their conversion, due to certain family pressure, which they later regretted, and they really, really felt very bad about it, they have violated certain parts of the agreement, and we were convinced that generally she was sincere, but because we wanted to be able to do the right thing and follow our own rules, we have done the conversion again. She had to go again, accept the mitzvahs, and go to mikveh. But in her case, in that particular case, we saw that there was definitely sincerity, but there was a tragic mistake that a person has made. But generally speaking, it's something that is obvious not just to the Beth Din, but to the sponsoring rabbi, to the teacher, to the community. People generally say, yes, we see this person is, they want to keep, that they want to be able to live a Jewish life. And we had cases in the past, they're getting more and more rare, but we had cases in the past when the feedback we got from everybody was that it's just basically done only to be able to achieve something, and there's no real desire to be Jewish, and we didn't want to proceed with that conversion. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your questions. They always make it more interesting.
The rest of the questions will be addressed next time.
We understand that there are many other questions, and we will address them. And you can send questions that will determine also the other topics. Like I said before, more and more I want to create topics out of the questions asked. And we hope to see you next week.